Florence Armin. Welcome to Viewpoint on Berita Satu. Coming up, President Joko Widodo shifts focus to the economy, and with official visits to China and the US, can he turn around his ailing political fortunes? The Supreme Court to review the case of a Filipino drug courier scheduled for the next round of executions, which could delay them for months. And the new acting chairman of KPK, Taufikur Rahman Ruki, says he's nobody's frontman, but where to for the anti-graft body? Joining me on the panel, Andrea Sarsono, Indonesia researcher for Human Rights Watch, and Dr. Ross Tapsell, a lecturer in Asian Studies at the Australian National University in Canberra, who researches the media in Indonesia and Malaysia. Welcome to both of you. Now, Andreas, the first president this week has shifted to the economy instead. He released a package of policies which is aimed at boosting economic growth and stabilizing the rupiah. But it hasn't been, let's be honest, it hasn't been a very smooth 100 days for Jokowi. What's your opinion on this?
From human rights perspective, there are three things that he made mistake. One is the weakening of the anti-corruption campaign via the KPK, and the second is his silence on the killing of Papuan back in December 2014, and the third is, of course, the death penalty, the blanket rejections of drug traffickers. So it is a mistake from the human rights point of view. And of course, politically, his popularity also dropped because of what he did with all those three things.
Okay. Do you think he hasn't been getting the right advice on these three main issues that you're watching?
I'm afraid yes. For instance, on the death penalty, he had a meeting with 5 of his advisors before December 18, and no one told him that there are going to be implications, not only for foreigners, foreign countries, Australia, Brazil, the Netherlands, France, when he is executing their citizens, but also implication on Indonesian migrant workers, mostly more than 300 overseas, mostly in Malaysia and Saudi Arabia. Because if Jokowi is to execute the foreigners, of course, Indonesian standing in terms of defending our own citizens is, weakened. Yeah.
Okay. Now, Ross, new leaders usually enjoy what we call the honeymoon period. Now, why hasn't Jokowi seemingly on day one since he took office been enjoying a honeymoon period here?
Well, I was here during the election in 2014 and during the last month prior to the Pilpres, and I saw Jokowi's campaign up close. And when you looked at that campaign, what you really saw was rather chaotic campaign, leadership which was not clear, who was in charge in various capacities, it wasn't clear. And you also saw his own political party sometimes undermining him. And so watching that campaign, I thought, oh, this is obviously not highly professional, but it's seemingly going to get through okay. Having said that, now we've seen all of those problems, which I saw in the campaign, just transfer to his government. The PDIP party, those internally not assisting and not helping, the poor advice that he's getting, which we also saw during the campaign, strategies were sometimes bizarre. So this is really a follow-on from that, it would seem.
So you followed him closely on his campaign trail, and you think that he's following through with his promises, visions, and missions during the campaign period?
Well, if you look at, say, the death penalty, I mean, that was never once mentioned during the campaign. There was no issue of the drug emergency. He didn't run on that platform. And then suddenly now Indonesia has a drug emergency which has to be solved, and it apparently needs to be solved by executing everyone on death row. This was never mentioned during the campaign. So that kind of means that is this just an ad hoc kind of decision making going on at the moment? But of course, the biggest problem, as you mentioned, has been the Budi Gunawan case and the KPK as well.
Do you think he has been, Harsono, do you think he's been ill-advised in regards to the Budi Gunawan case, the KPK, and executions?
Well, the KPK is a different thing, but on the death execution, I think he was ill-advised. Okay. Actually, 1 week before he announced his decision, I talked with one of his advisors, and I told her, don't do that, because there are going to be implications. if you do that. And of course, it is wrong. It is legally wrong. It is internationally, it is wrong, morally wrong.
I mean, we always knew that Jokowi would be not very, not have a lot of experience in some matters. For example, foreign relations.
Right.
We knew that this wasn't his strength, and he admitted that. But what we thought during the campaign, and those of us who watched his role as the governor of Jakarta or mayor of Solo, we thought that he'd be intelligent enough to put the right people in the right positions. And therefore, if it wasn't his strength, he'd find someone who was strong on these matters and would be well advised. Now, so the big question is, well, who's advising him on various matters?
Now, what do you think he needs to do in the coming future for him to regain or to win over support?
On several fronts. On Papua, he needs to fulfill what his promise, investigating the killing of Papuan teenagers in December 2014, to opening Papua to international monitors, journalists, donors, like what he had promised during the campaign as well. And also on Papua, he needs to release political prisoners, because he needs to increase his popularity to regain what he had lost. In terms of the KPK, the new KPK leadership will be deliberated in the parliament. He needs to nominate people who really have strong background in dealing with corruptions in the natural resources sector. And Jokowi would like those sectors to be investigated, because that is the source of the biggest corruption in Indonesia. Unfortunately, he also weakened the KPK by accepting the dismissal of the resignation of Abraham Samad and Bambang Wijoyanto, the two KPK leaders who were very aggressive, the most aggressive of all three periods of KPK in terms of natural resources.
So he should really seek for the best, more experienced advisor in the next few coming weeks, if he were to overcome his current predicaments.
I think part of the problem in Papua also, he needs more support from the parliament. And one of the problems that we saw when he talked about opening up Papua was that various parliamentarians, including those in the coalition Maraputi, saw this as a negative thing. Some even said, oh, this is kind of Jokowi looking for independence, which of course it wasn't. That was ridiculous. So I do think that Parliament could support some of these initiatives of opening up Papua more for foreign journalists, and indeed looking into the various cases that you mentioned, so that it's not all on the president himself.
To stop the impunity in Papua.
Yeah. Now, you've noticed, we all know that at the beginning, when Jokowi nominated himself, or even before that, he's been a media darling. Well, how do you think the media coverage has been in recent months? He's always an interesting figure to focus on.
Yes, well, certainly the media had a large role in Jokowi's rise to power. We know that. We know that 24-hour news channels really jumped in on the Blusukan, the Blusukan being a big part of his success in getting nationwide coverage. Now he's president, and the Blusukan isn't something that you do every day. This is not something the president works, and he hasn't really adapted to, in terms of media coverage, but I think generally, he hasn't really adapted from this kind of local mayor, Jakarta governor approach through to how a president should work. For example, one of the complaints that foreign journalists usually make is, well, he hasn't appointed a spokesperson. Right. When you're the mayor of Solo, or the governor of Jakarta, it's less important. When you're the president, you need a good spokesperson. And so this is part of this 100-day transition that he needs to do.
Okay, like Andreas and Ross, we'll take a break, but when we come back, we'll talk about executions on Viewpoint.